For more than 60 years, RRSPs, that's Registered Retirement Savings Plans, have offered Canadians a way to save for the golden years and save some tax dollars at the same time. Other savings vehicles also exist, such as the tax-free savings account, but unlike defined benefit pension plans, such plans make no guarantees and leave much of the strategizing up to the individual. With us now to consider how well this serves people trying to plot their post-work finances, we welcome Alex Mazur, co-founder and retirement plan provider at Commonwealth; Caroline Cakebread, pension consultant and the founder of the Canadian Leadership Congress; Jackie Porter, certified financial planner with Carte Wealth Management; Hugh O'Reilly, executive in residence at the Global Risk Institute and a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute; and Michael Nicin, executive director of Ryerson University's National Institute of Aging and co-author of the forthcoming report, Improving Canada's Retirement Income System. There we go. Sorry, we had no time left for the show. No, good to have everybody here. Let us start, because the conundrum we're going to talk about today is actually summed up, Michael, in your report. So we are going to read an excerpt from that, and then we're off to the races. Sheldon, if you would. We have an older population with different sets of needs and priorities than we had when much of our retirement income security system was established. We're living longer, spending more time in older age than ever before without working income, and investment return prospects are not what they have been historically. Yet our retirement income system, in broad strokes, still functions on many of the assumptions, good and bad, that we had decades ago. This is not meant to ignore the many earnest and effective changes introduced in recent years, such as an enhanced CPP, the relatively new and popular TFSAs, and the rebounding sustainability of many major public sector pension plans. It does mean, however, that we need to continue to work to adapt the system to the 21st century realities. Okay, Michael, start us off here, because there's a lot to unpack there. What are the old assumptions that our retirement incomes are based on today?
Well, I'd say the first one is how long we live, and especially how long we live after retirement. So I'm sure everyone here knows the story, apocryphal or not. When pensions were introduced by Bismarck in Germany, they were introduced at age 65. People tended to die at 66, 67. So that was the original conception of pension plans. And even as recently as the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in Canada, we were living half as long in retirement as we are today. Right now, we're living 20 years past 65 on average, and we see that number increasing. Over the next 30 years, we expect the number of people over the age of 80 to triple in Canada. So I'd say that's the biggest assumption we're not adjusting for quickly enough, is longevity gains.
So as long as these things were set up for a system where you only were going to live and collect for 2 years, it was fine.
Absolutely.
Now we're living 30 years beyond, and it's more complicated.
Yeah, and then when you add on layers, as you mentioned, lower interest rates, housing prices, especially in major cities in Canada, compete for those resources we might have put aside for retirement later on, raising families, education debt. There's a lot of competition for every single dollar we make, and fewer of them are landing in retirement accounts, and we need to stretch them over a longer period of time, and we're not doing that very well yet.
Hugh, jump in.
Steve, I think the most fundamental implicit assumption that the retirement income system is based upon, whether it's RRSPs or whether it's defined benefit plans or any other kind of vehicle, is this. There's an assumption that interest rates are going to be at a certain level, and when interest rates are at a certain higher level than they've been over the last really 20 years, but certainly the last 10 years, that creates a real set of issues for people. It makes it a lot harder, whether it's a major pension plan, but certainly for individuals to invest in order to make sure that they're going to earn what they need to earn to have a secure retirement. It also then, I think, has psychological effects. People start to feel insecure. They worry about outliving their money. They wonder how they're going to invest their money to earn a return. And with that fundamental building block not there, I think it's a real problem. Another issue I would say is, people have talked about that interest rates are going to return to historical norms now. People are not saying that anymore.
Right.
So we're in this low for long financially. It's called financial repression, but this environment is going to make it really, I think, a lot harder for people.
Caroline.
Well, I'd also add that, people don't work the way they used to. In the 1960s, 70s, and even the 80s, people would stay at a company for their entire career, in which case a DB pension sponsored by that company made a lot of sense.
Defined benefit pension.
Yes, a defined benefit pension. And nowadays, people people change jobs frequently. We're in the midst of the gig economy where people aren't necessarily even working for a specific employer, they're self-employed. And the options for those people are few and far between. And the pension system itself, within workplace-sponsored pensions, hasn't really evolved along with that in terms of creating something that's portable as people move from job to job.
Well, let me ask Jackie about that. If we consider that the good old-fashioned RSP has been around for a little over 6 decades, how well do you think it still serves us as a savings vehicle to look out for our golden years?
I think that it's one of many, and I wanted to just touch on some of the things you were talking about, that people are living longer, and the truth is the people who are living the longest, we need to identify them. They're female. We live 4 years longer, and so typically we're actually retiring into poverty. We're at a greater risk of retiring into poverty than men. So the people who truly are at risk when it comes to worrying about retirement are women.
Older women.
Older women,
and therefore,
particularly single women.
And therefore what?
And therefore we need to pay attention to what we're doing for retirement the most. We need to pay attention to how we're saving for retirement, really consider the vehicles available to us more than any other group.
So Alex, does the old-fashioned RSP still cut it?
Well, I think the panel summed it up nicely in terms of some of the trends that have happened, the move away from collective workplace-based retirement plans because of the changing nature of work and aging. That has left people effectively in the retail financial services industry for retirement, and I would say that that system to date has served Canadians very poorly. We pay some of the highest fees in the world. People struggle with saving. There are no vehicles or very few vehicles to help people pool their risk and guarantee their income as they get older. There is no real fiduciary standard for people, so that has led to a very inefficient and expensive system for people. Retirement is one of the most expensive things that people purchase, if you think about it that way, over the course of their lifetime, and it's not getting any cheaper with the aging population. So I think the challenge ahead of all of us is to find ways to make retirement easier and more affordable for people, especially who don't have access to traditional workplace pensions.
If that's the challenge, what are you offering up as a solution?
Well, our whole view is we have to rethink the model for those 10 million Canadians that are not covered by a traditional pension. We have to create what are effectively portable retirement benefits that have as many aspects of a good workplace pension as possible, but also have the flexibility that is adapted to a world where a lot of people are self-employed, where people change jobs more frequently, and where people need something they can take with them from working situation to working situation. So that's the model that we work with a variety of different partners.
But I think these facts are, when you combine them also with the fact that I think the Canadian financial services industry is amongst the best and strongest in the world, there's certain other facts that I think are going to create a demand for products, and I think we will see innovation, but it's a matter of spurring it on. I mean, for example, Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan did a study, and their study with Abacus, and their study demonstrated that individuals are willing to give up chunks of salary for a better retirement. The other thing we know is, and there's all sorts of behavioral finance on this, people hate making investment decisions. They hate it. And they don't know how to do it. They feel really uncomfortable. It makes them feel stupid. There's a lack of literacy, but I'm not sure literacy per se is going to answer the question. And then lastly, I think we've had some significant achievements. The expansion of CPP, led by the province of Ontario, but ultimately adopted nationally, I think is going to make things better, but that's 40 years out. But we now have to start thinking about products that will allow people to get a steady income. Right now, those are very expensive, but that's the kind of thing people are looking for. We do have an innovative industry. We just have to spur it on with these facts.
I know you want to get in here. You should just, for the record, we should say, you say led by the province of Ontario. It was Premier Kathleen Wynne who led that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just putting it out there for the record, because a lot of Wynne haters in this province still, and if you like your CPP the way it is, improved, you can probably thank her for it.
Prior role, I ran a major pension plan. We supported the initiative. I've spoken at Brookings. Actually, Alex and I were on the panel, and we made it clear that Premier Wynne, then Premier Wynne, made this happen. Okay. And it shows but that's innovation from the public sector too. And we need to have these innovative activities underway, and we need to figure out a way to spur them.
Caroline.
Steve, I'd like to get back to your original question around whether or not the typical RRSP is kind of a broken system. And I'd like to step back and look at the whole alphabet soup of options that the average Canadian is faced with cobbling together for their retirement, whether it's an RRSP or a TFSA. Study after study has
OAS,
shown-
GIC,
OAS,
CPP.
yeah, exactly.
You guys love your acronyms, I gotta say.
Exactly. I think study after study and survey after survey has shown that, first of all, people aren't contributing on a regular basis to any of these programs, which is really critical. People need to start saving in the first place. And secondly, people need to start understanding that, these vehicles aren't just investment vehicles. They're vehicles that also require tax advice as well and real financial planning around it beyond, I think, what some of the other panelists have talked about, which is simply just investment advice.
Right, and truthfully, the reality is even when people are putting money in investment vehicles like RSPs, and this is something that people don't pay attention or spend time talking enough about, they're putting it in investment vehicles. They're not putting it in investment vehicles, they're putting it in savings plans.
Yeah.
Well, and let's say high interest savings accounts are kind of a misnomer because if they're earning 1%, it's a lot. And then they'll put it in there and they'll not think about it again for another year. Yeah. So 60% of Canadians are putting their money in like a high interest account or a GIC and not investing the money even when it's actually in an investment account like an RSP.
Well, Michael, I know you tend to, as the name of your organization would suggest, the National Institute on Aging, you tend to take care of people at the closer to the end of their lives than the beginning of their lives.
Well, that's where we start looking at it, but all those problems, if you have them saving for retirement, your health care, your personal well-being, it starts much earlier. So while we might be dealing with a bulge of older people now, that bulge, for example, won't stop. It's not going to end with the baby boomer generation. We're having fewer children, people are living longer. We could expect an aging population to persist in Canada. And so I think the message has to ricochet down to younger Canadians.
Having said that, how do you convince somebody who's in their 20s who will have a difficult time saving up enough money for rent or to buy a home or may have difficulty getting that first job that now is actually the time to start saving for your retirement?
Well, I think we have to go back to high school and the lessons of compound interest. If nothing else, set aside money. I think there's a lot of discussion now, and I think in this context of breaking apart the retirement income system in Canada, we have to remember that we're actually pretty good as a nation in being prudent and minding our finances. We weather the recession better than most, and so I think we have that ethic in Canada. And one of those is automatic savings, and you're starting to hear more discussions about that. Can we set up systems, and government might have a role to play in here, where we could have opt-in systems or opt-out systems, but where we develop a culture where saving automatically for retirement becomes the norm.
That has to happen, and I actually disagree with you. I don't think we're as prudent as we used to be when it comes to saving. Not when for every dollar Canadians are earning, they're losing $1.70 to debt.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we have the discipline that we once had. I think we're becoming very, very comfortable with debt. And going back to what you were saying, I think mandatory workplace financial literacy programs, I think would be a really great place because that's one of the places that people gather and they typically have, if they're in a workplace environment where they have a savings plan set up already, sometimes what's happening is it gets set up but the provider never comes back and gives financial literacy sessions.
Can I just understand that? Because we're hearing a lot about high school literacy tests right now. You want something in the workplace.
Right, because there's many, there are companies out there that have employer-sponsored plans, retirement plans. They are set up. The clients I deal with are faced with making decisions about where they should invest their money. They have no idea. They're not getting a lot of guidance from the suppliers on what they should be putting their money in. And maybe after the plan's set up, they're kind of left to their own devices.
But Alex, I hear all the time people talk about all these we joked about it a second ago, all these acronyms that nobody knows what they stand for, and it's all very complicated. How you want to get through all that?
Well, there's one Nobel Prize winner that called retirement the hardest, nastiest problem in finance. And yet we have a system where we expect people to navigate a lot of that on their own. Yeah. And I think one of the common themes you've been hearing on the panels, we need to set up automatic pathways for people where a lot of those decisions are made for them in a way that puts their interests first. That part's really important as well.
But I think I don't want to be impolite, but I think it has to extend beyond just the savings aspect. because I think where this fails, and I think the behavioral finance literature on this is overwhelming, people don't want to make the choices. And our financial services industry is capable, even in a defined contribution environment where you're just putting money away, we can develop products where people don't have to make those decisions. So we can have
What does that look like?
So, well, what it could look like, for example, is I know Manulife has products on the defined contribution side where they have liability-driven investing. That's what the major pension plans do. So that
liability-driven
investment products for individuals.
Which means?
Which means what it does is it makes sure that your risk of loss is reduced. It reduces the interest rate sensitivity, and it protects you. And what we need to do, I think, is change the regulatory environment, because what sponsors worry about is if I put you in a product and you lose money, you're going to come back at me. So we need an environment, a regulatory environment that says these 2, 3, 4 kinds of products, these are fine. And if you do these, this will work, because there's no guarantees in any of these investments.
Yeah, Caroline.
Yeah, I agree that product innovation and policy change is really needed. You know, I think we've put a lot of weight onto financial literacy to kind of fix this problem. But at the end of the day, the system can be confusing. Access to good advice can be hard to come by for a lot of Canadians. And, you know, the savings patterns just aren't there. So I think anything we can do to create a system that actually facilitates this a bit more easily for people, the better.
Whose responsibility is it to do that?
Well, you know, I think to Hugh's point, the industry could be ready with better products to kind of take that investment decision-making out of the hands of people that don't want to make those decisions. And I think that would be a great first start. But, you know, on a policy level as well, you know, RRSPs, TFSAs, you know, we've been through all the acronyms. You know, those are driven by policymakers for the most part. So, you know, what are policymakers going to do to perhaps create a more cohesive system?
And to that, I go to Michael and ask him, to what degree do you think the policymakers in, for example, the government of Ontario, are either doing adequately or inadequately to ensure some of the things that we've been talking about here are happening or not?
Well, what Keith and I say in our paper is that we've had... Keith Ambershire, of course, is we've had something of an ad hoc approach to this in Canada. I wouldn't say across the board the governments haven't listed. It took decades to get CPP enhancement, but eventually we crossed that threshold. And it's a big threshold. It's 2/3 of the provinces with 2/3 of the population plus the federal government, right? And that's where Kathleen Wynne's government was instrumental. But, you know, we got there. And I think we need more coordinated will across governments, more coordination across the provinces. So I think, you know, one of the more recent cases is that Ontario is the standout in not eliminating deferred fees on certain products, right? The only province out of others that didn't follow through there. And I think that kind of sort of omission across the country sticks out, and it puts Ontario at jeopardy.
Let me follow up on that. Jackie, the issue of fees. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not even going to ask a question. Go. What do you think? I did ask a question, but there we go.
I think fees are definitely something that people, first of all, there's lots of literature that says Canadians are paying more for fees than they should be versus what other countries are paying. So people can do their own math and determine, you know, what they should pay. But the reality is, you know, ultimately, what you're going to pay has a lot to do with what what's available to you and what investments options are available to you. And as I had mentioned, Canadians are buying, 60% of them are buying products where they're making hardly any money. So fees are important, and you should know how much you're paying. And the industry has gotten better at giving transparency to fees so that clients can have a better understanding. What am I paying for? What am I supposed to receive in terms of a return? Financial plans help, because typically when you do financial plans, you have a return that you're looking at that will give you a sense of, am I on track? Is the return I'm receiving on my statements going to put me on track for the retirement plan that I've created? So I think fees are important. People shouldn't pay more than they shouldn't pay more than they shouldn't pay more than they need to for fees. And there's all different types of products out there. So
but people don't know. Jackie,
that's true.
They don't know what the products are. They don't know what a reasonable fee is. They don't know what's too high. Obviously, they'd like to pay nothing, but that's not fair to you folks. So
Right.
what's reasonable?
I think a reasonable fee, like fees in the absence of value. So a conversation about fees without understanding what you're actually buying for those fees is a really hard conversation to discuss because you have no idea. So every client should have a conversation with their advisor and say, okay, what are my fees? What am I paying? And what am I getting for those fees?
Okay, let's play it out.
Right.
I'm your client.
Right.
What am I paying you and what am I getting for that?
My clients pay anywhere from 0.85 to 1%, depending on the size of their account.
And what's typical in the business?
What could be typical could be up to 2%, maybe 2.5% for advice.
Is that reasonable?
Well, I think the key is to, as Jackie said, to show them how that plays out over time, right? So is the average mutual fund fee here
2.5%.
in Canada is 2 to 3%,
Yeah.
right? And while that might not seem very much off the top of your head, over time and through compounding over the years, that really does add up and eat into your return over time.
Is that unreasonable, 2 to 3%?
You know what? It is high, but at the end of the day, I think you have to Jackie's point, kind of understand what you're getting for that. Because what are we getting? What should we expect in exchange for the fees we pay? Well, advice, holistic advice, perhaps around our account. Some level of whatever transactions are involved.
A withdrawal. So typically when people are paying, because there's fees for investments and the return you're receiving, and typically statements will say, here's my return net of fees. So have a sense of how that compares to what the market is charging. So if I'm buying an index fund that I'm paying no fee, how does the fee that I'm paying relate to what the index, if I paid no fees?
Why are you charging less than the average?
Sorry, say that again.
Why are you charging less than the average?
Why am I charging? Because I want to demonstrate value. But I mean, my job as an investment advisor is if I'm going to help clients manage, navigate, and make these decisions, I should be able to charge a fee that's either lower or at par with the fee they would pay in the marketplace, and do it smoother so that they don't have to go through all the ups and downs of the volatility they'd face if they just bought an index.
What's your practice on this, Alex?
Well, I think it's unreasonable, the fees that our financial services industry charges. I mean, 2 to 3% is way out of line with the rest of the world.
Given what interest rates are at?
It's just there's no value there that relates to the fee. I think at the end of the day, trying to bring fees closer to what a large pension plan or a large collective plan would charge is what we aim for. I think at the end of the day, it is about value. But if you look at, and Michael's organization and ours and the HOOP plan that Hugh mentioned did a study together that found that the average worker could save almost $1 million by saving in a more efficient way. In other words, retirement can cost over $1 million or it can cost several $100,000 depending on how you do it. So I think if we want to make this issue interesting for younger people, we have to put it more in an affordability lens. We're concerned about the affordability of housing or education, other things like that. This is a major life purchase that we can make way cheaper for millions of Canadians.
But context is important. Because so increasingly we have people pouring into ETFs.
Correct.
And the fee pressure.
Pouring into what?
Exchange-traded funds, which are index funds.
That's another acronym.
It's another acronym. People are going into them. The fees are virtually nothing. And the fees for a lot of managers are going down, down, down. But there is a value proposition. There are different kinds of investments that have higher fees. There are different kinds of investors where you actually want to purchase their expertise. This is a complicated issue, and a concern I have, and it relates to literacy, is if people are going to just pour into no-fee ETFs and the rest of it without understanding liquidity, without understanding the risk they're taking on. It's what you get for that, and then it becomes the issue of reasonableness.
But we do pay among the highest fees in the world, apparently, if you compare our country to other countries.
But the market is driving that down.
That's correct.
And that market drives it down every day. And I mean, I'm not necessarily justifying high fees, but what I'm saying is it's a conversation. And when we see ads on TV, which people are totally, they're entitled to put on, we've got to understand what are all the things that go into the fee, and then does it make sense? I think
Caroline?
context.
I think, we're talking about the fees, we're talking about the products, but at the end of the day, I think for average savers, the focus is outcome. right? So for that fee, wow, I would totally pay 2 to 3% if I know that at the end of the day I'm going to have some kind of certainty of what my income's going to be when I retire. Absolutely. But right now, given the options in front of us, we don't have that. As Hugh pointed out, we're at the mercy of interest rates, we're at the mercy of market volatility, and at the end of the day, people are hoping, fingers crossed, that the advice that they're getting is going to help them navigate that, but there's really no guarantees, and I think that's somewhat problematic.
And I think the reality is if we're, again, talking about fee in the absence of value, there's a lot of financial decisions that have to be made over and above return that will cost the clients money, and that has to do with tax planning. What's my retirement navigation plan? How am I going to withdraw money out of all my different accounts and pay the least amount of tax? Am I on track to retire based on the rate of return that we've set, a reasonable rate of return of 4 or 5 or 6%? My clients will pay for that because they actually don't want to just buy an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, go with all of the ups and downs of the markets, and have really no idea if that's going to be enough for them to live on when they're ready to retire based on their lifestyle. Those are the conversations that we're having outside of just fees with our clients. It's not just about how much did I pay for that, because easily you could go to a computer and have a computer generate the investments for you. We're in this world now that we could do that. But truthfully, people actually want a human approach where they're talking to somebody and actually having somebody guide them through that whole retirement conversation. Because it's confusing.
Well, the behavioral piece is huge, right? I mean, the savings behavior piece, you pointed that out earlier, Jackie, the tax piece, and turning your income, turning your nest egg into a stream of income. These are really tough things to do. There's definitely a role for planners, especially planners that have a duty to put people's interests first, and that are charging a reasonable price. And there's a role for technology as well, technology innovation to help with some of these complex decisions, which the average person, has a hard time figuring out on their own.
I am going to rhetorically ask our viewers and listeners on podcast out there how well they think Canada fares in the world on this. And you might think, because we've got a pretty solid, established financial services industry in this country, that we're right up there near the top. And you'd be wrong, because we got something here called the Melbourne-Mercer Global Pension Index, which ranks countries from A to D with a letter grade all throughout the world. Denmark, I'm going to read a bit of this out loud for those listening on podcast who can't see the chart here, but those who get a grade A, better than 80 index value, only Denmark and Netherlands. Australia comes second with a B+. Then Canada's in with Chile, Finland, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland. We're a B. We got a B, 65 to 75. C+, France, Hong Kong, Malaysia, the UK, the USA. C, Austria, Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, Italy, Peru, Poland, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Spain. And then D's, don't give these folks your money, only 35 to 50. Argentina, China, India, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Philippines, Thailand, and Turkey. Japan, G7 country. Rich, what are they doing on that list? Well, okay, never mind Japan. Michael, what are we doing out there with a B? Why are we only a B?
Well, there's a number of factors, and we actually get into it in the report that we're releasing. And I think it's important to remember, and this might relate to Japan, although I'm not an expert on Japanese retirement income systems, is the sustainability of our public system factors heavily into how that index is created. So we know, for example, Japan has a ballooning aging population, and they're doing very little to affect change there, to drive it down, notoriously resistant to immigration and such. In Canada's case, the 3 recommendations on improving it, which are the way of flipping around the question of what are the weaknesses, is let's protect existing pension plans and vehicles that exist today, make sure that they're safe and sound and can be sustained for the future. And then building on that, how do you give Canadians who don't belong to a pension plan access to efficient vehicles for savings? That could be RSPs and others, but it's really about accomplishing the mission of driving up that savings rate. That's also the third part, just saving more. The second part, saving more in general. And then the last part relates specifically to an aging population, which is getting Canadians to work longer if they can. Stay in the workforce, earn more income for longer, delay retirement. That's one way of preventing income.
I see Alex furiously taking notes there, and do you have something to add on that?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, in my view, it's really the second one that's the big opportunity for improvement in our system, right? We have some very good public sector plans. Hugh used to run one of those.
Which one?
OP Trust.
Okay.
But we have 10 million people that don't have access to a workplace plan. And so that's, I think, the problem we need to solve. You know, there's a role for government in that. But you asked earlier, who bears the responsibility? You know, employers did a lot to provide people access to pensions during the first part of the 20th century. And that started to decline since the 70s. So I think we have to think about who are the new groups that might sponsor plans. You know, one example is we just worked with the Ontario Medical Association to create a plan for physicians who are self-employed, and most of them don't have access to a pension. That's an example of an association, a professional association that people remain attached to throughout their professional career, trying to do the right thing for their members, which is really a combination of human touch and a group plan that's at low cost. I think there's room for more solutions like that to play a bit of the role of the employer. But to take into consideration the thing Caroline was saying at the beginning about people changing jobs more often.
I know there are, I mean, doctors do well, they earn well, but there aren't that many of them actually in the province of Ontario. Are they enough to create a critical mass that just Ontario doctors will be able to create a good pension plan?
Yeah, no, for sure. They've got 40,000 members, and I think that, you know, doctors struggle with some of the same financial issues as many other Canadians. I mean, they're very, very busy. They're very good at what they do, but they also need help like others in preparing for what is a fairly significant financial issue in their financial life.
Hugh, what would you change?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think one is we should create a regulatory environment that allows for the creation of novel kind of pension solutions. So OP Trust, for example, for the not-for-profit sector, has established a plan called OP Trust Select. And it's modest contribution rates. It's 3% from the employer, 3% from the employee. But when combined with CPP, OAS, someone making $50,000, gives them a sum certain that they're going to receive, makes life better. The Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology, they've put together some novel solutions around pension plans as well. And the province of Ontario in the last budget passed legislation that would allow in the not-for-profit sector to set up these jointly sponsored plans that would have these features. Another issue I think we have to think about is established pension plans have rich benefits in terms of early retirement, things like that. That isn't the reality that people live anymore. Mm-hmm. So if we set up pension plans that provide for a base level of income in retirement, I think that those kind of going back to expecting less, but getting what you need might be a good beginning point.
Caroline, why are we a B?
Well, I think age does play a role in that, as was mentioned earlier. But at the same time, I think what is it? The average payment, the monthly average payment from CPP is $600. That's not quite enough to cut it when you're in retirement. And again, we do have a number of products out there to choose from, kind of hard to put together. But ultimately, I really agree with you that we need to start thinking about really maybe somewhat of a one-stop shop for people when they are thinking of saving for retirement, to give them something easy to do, because as Jackie mentioned earlier, people are they're carrying record debt loads. Wage growth isn't where it needs to be in Canada. We can agree that there's been a level of stagnation on wage growth. So help people out a little bit, make this easier for them, give them a place to put their money once they've been able to put it together, and give them just sort of throw them a bone with a little bit more certainty about what they can receive in retirement that is a little bit beyond $600.
Alex, do the public pension plans outperform individuals' plans?
By a long shot, if you look at a typical individual and how they fare in a public plan. This was the study I mentioned earlier that we worked on together with HOOP. They just have many advantages that an individual doesn't have. So I think the question is really, how do you bring some of those advantages? It's low cost, yes, but I agree with you, Jackie. It's not just about low cost. It's about pooling the risk. It's about investment expertise to make the right choices for retirement. And it's about helping people plan for a predictable income in retirement as well, which is really the end goal that we're talking about here.
What would you change, Jackie, to make things better?
I would actually love to see, again, I think that the reality is the narrative for women in this country is not great, and women get penalized in the pension system because we're usually going in and out of the pension system because we're taking care of our children and we're taking care of aging parents, and we often don't make as much. So how do we create a system that's not just equitable for everyone, but that takes into account the differences, the differences in what we're going to likely end up with as a pension?
Let me put that question to Michael with this. Do you think we can obligate all businesses who want to do business in the province of Ontario to provide a pension to their employees?
Obligate is a strong word in Canada. The resistance we saw to the CPP enhancements is a case study in itself. So anyone who was opposed to it, and there was employer groups, tax federations and such, called it a payroll tax, a burden on the payers, on Canadian employers, that it'll take money out of your pocket. I think obligating is a threshold probably too far for us to cross here. What I would like to see is encouragement and incentives to do so.
Think about, though, the OMERs, all of the WHO pension, these are all pensions that people have to contribute to. So it's interesting that obligating is such a dirty word.
Well, it's not that. It's forcing private sector businesses
Right.
into providing a vehicle. I think, I don't know that that's reasonable in the short term.
Has Australia done it?
Australia has done it, but they've done it similar. I mean, it's more similar, or it's a hybrid between what our CPP is and an employer-based plan, right? It's across the board. I think it's a worthy conversation. I just don't expect that to happen in short order. I think it's a conversation that needs to happen, though.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad we had some of it on TVO tonight. Mr. Director, can I have a wide shot, please? So I can thank everybody for coming on this program and talking about pensions and making it interesting. Well done, everybody. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.